Stay tuned as we will be going live soon. To sponsor a show or advertise, call or WhatsApp 0763 593 288. Melo Media. Melo Media. Melo Media. Stay tuned as we will be going live soon. To sponsor a show or advertise, call or WhatsApp 0763 593 288. Melo Media. Melo Media. Melo Media.
Hello, my name is Christian Chileshe. I'm a development practitioner, and I'm speaking to you live from Sierra Leone. And you are live on Melo Media, on Facebook and YouTube. And today I'd like us to just reflect on this very topical issue of the IMF package. And I'm hoping that we can bring it down to a level that enables everybody to participate, and not just those that may understand the economics of it. I would especially like us to think about the approach that we are using to engage and discuss this issue. Now, although I'm right now far from Zambia, I've been very much involved with the benefit of social media. I have been very much involved in this matter. And there has been a tendency to try and just reduce it to two positions. That of those that are for the IMF deal and those that are against. And I've been very keen to listen to the debates. Those that are for have advanced their thinking. Those that are against have equally advanced their thinking. But if you pause for a moment and try to just listen to the arguments, you realize that this matter is not as straightforward as we sometimes want to make it. Because if you look at those that are for the IMF package, they have given their reasons, and it's a diverse range of reasons. Some, or maybe even many, may not have interrogated the content of the package, but just have this confidence in a foreign institution to come in and see how we can be helped. Especially those that have lost confidence in our local institutions, they're just saying, look, let the IMF come in. But have you looked at the detail? Similarly, those that are against have an even more diverse background in terms of position. Some just recall what we've gone through under IMF programs and are saying no IMF, okay, before they look at the content of the deal. Then you have those that are saying, hey, we can come up with a plan from our own internal resources, so no need to borrow. Some are taking a position against the whole idea of borrowing. Okay, borrowing is not a good thing, so let's not go into debt. We're already in enough debt, so let's just see what we can do for ourselves. Okay, and so on. There are various thoughts that are being advanced. The IMF package involves about $1.4 billion over a period of 3 years. Okay, that's the quantum, that's the amount involved. And if you check from the last budget presentation, it involved 173 billion kwacha, which translates to about $10 billion Okay. So over the 3 years, if we maintain this level of spending, then we are talking about at least $30 billion over 3 years. And the IMF is 1.4 billion over 3 years. So I just said that to put it in context so that we don't lose track, because some of those that feel the IMF should come in, for instance, will say the IMF will come in and solve all our problems. It is $1.4 billion over 3 years. We're currently spending at $10 billion, at least for 2022, just to keep it in perspective. If you think about it, it's not very easy to reduce this debate into just two camps: those that are for and those that are against. There are also those that are uncertain and would like to just understand issues better, and based on that, see how we can proceed. There are those that may be for it, subject to certain conditions, okay, certain things being met. Some are against, unless certain things are done. So there is this middle ground that is also possible. So I think our discussion of the IMF package should open up an even bigger conversation that enables us to reflect on what the real issues are. What are we trying to address here, so that we know where the IMF package can fit in? Now, I do not intend to go into the economics of this whole thing. I think a lot of it has been thrown around and is available for people to look at. But what I would like us to think about is how we may be approaching this issue and how it may be affecting our ability to reflect clearly on it, so that as a country, we can come to some kind of common ground that will enable us to move forward one way or the other. Whether it is IMF or it's not IMF, at the end of the day, it's about Zambia and how we can move forward to address issues that we are currently facing. For those that may be thinking about not proceeding, let's start with those that may be thinking about going ahead with the IMF. To what extent are we discussing some of the conditionalities that are attached to this deal? Are we asking those questions? Because there are some broad headings that have been provided by the finance minister that are ranging from the economic, social, and issues of governance and addressing issues around there. But as they say, the devil is in the detail. What has been included there, so that we know what we're getting ourselves into? Remember that at the end of the day, it is how well we negotiate that determines what we walk away with. And we have entrusted a team of individuals to sit with IMF, have a conversation, and come up with something that is felt to be acceptable both sides. Okay. Ours is to hold those individuals accountable for what they have signed up to, even before they sign up, actually. What has been included around each of those subheadings? How well have we negotiated around those things? What has been clearly defined as the responsibility of government? How are they coming back to us to explain to us how they're going to spend that money? And given our experience in the past, where money has been borrowed and spent in a manner that has not necessarily helped us, how are we holding these duty bearers accountable for ensuring that this money will be spent well? What institutional arrangements are we insisting on, so that at the end of the day, we have a higher level of confidence around how the money is going to be used? So I think even where people may be speaking about proceeding with the IMF package, I think we need to be talking about these things. So it's not just for or against, but if you are thinking of going ahead, how have you addressed this? How have you addressed this other thing? And so on. I think as Zambians, those are the kinds of conversations that we need to be having. Similarly, there are those that are not keen on this whole idea of, the IMF program. I think even for those, they will do us a lot of service if they can break it down to a level that can be understood by many of the people that we're dealing with, in the rural areas. Those that are actually more likely to be impacted by this whole thing because they are already in a vulnerable state. And any changes in macroeconomic factors quickly trickle down to them and affect them. So for me, this is the kind of reflection I would like us to have. There has been an argument, if we say we don't want to go ahead with the IMF program, there has been an argument that maybe we can just improve our tax collection, become more prudent in spending, and things to that effect. But what we may not realize is these things need to still happen with or without the IMF package. We do need to improve our tax collection. We do need to become more prudent in our spending. These things must happen. The issue of subsidies has come up, and we're very quick to attach it to the IMF and say, look, that's a condition that the IMF is attaching. But hey, even if we didn't go ahead with the IMF, will we be in a position to continue with subsidies? Because then we'll be worse off by the 1.4 billion over 3 years. So there'll be that much less money. So then if we say no IMF and we turn in within ourselves and say, okay, let's restructure how we are managing things, subsidies would still have to be looked at. Issue of taxation has to be looked at. Possibly increasing tax is one issue that may even come on the table. Is that what we want as Zambians? I'm just raising this issue. Now remember, I'm not really sold to the idea of the IMF, in itself. And I'm not against it. But it is this process of reflection that should lead us to a position. Otherwise, if we start our conversations with, I am not for the IMF because, then we've already taken a position, and now we're just trying to justify that position. That may not make for very constructive debate, because now it's about having established a position and then now trying to show why it can stand. And I'm going to do all I can to see how it can stand. But before I even take a position, I need to reflect on some of these issues. What are the alternatives? And they are there, okay, to the IMF. Are we discussing those alternatives? Okay. How easy is it to find an alternative given the state of the economy, given the credit rating that we are faced with? Can we find money from elsewhere outside of the country? Okay. Can we borrow if we still want to borrow? How easy would that be? Okay. So some of those issues need to be put on the table so that as we think about this issue of IMF or no IMF, borrowing or no borrowing, we're actually providing food for conversation. And then based on that material, we can then say, okay, maybe let's not do this. Maybe let's do that. Maybe let's even wait and then do it later. Or maybe let's not get 1.4 billion. Maybe let's get less. Or maybe, there's still all those permutations that we are not keen to go into, but want to simplify this whole discussion to either we go for IMF, you are in favor, or you are against. One of the issues that reminds me of how we like establishing just one of two positions in our conversations is when we're discussing Indeni. And it seemingly everybody wants us to be saying, are we going to keep Indeni or sell Indeni? Okay. And so when I raise the issue of what kind of technology currently exists at Indeni, is it able to function well? And I remember in that conversation, some people felt I'm actually trying to advocate for getting rid of Indeni, I mean, selling it, privatizing it. And what people may not have realized is there could be another position. We need to ask what technology is there, because even if it's obsolete, there is still the alternative of recapitalizing it without selling it. There's still the possibility of going to a public-private partnership, okay, and still government retaining a stake in it. So it's not either we sell Indeni to the private sector or we completely keep it. There are a few options in between. So asking the question of the current state of the facility is not in itself to suggest that therefore we should get rid of it if it's obsolete, or if it is state of the art, like somebody once said, then we should keep it because it's state of the art and it's very profitable, therefore we should keep it. I don't think it's just one of 2 points. There's a lot more to some of these issues than we want to realize. And I think as a country, we need to commit ourselves to getting to the detail, having conversation that is rich with knowledge material that allows us to therefore arrive at a position which may not even necessarily be one of 2 points, okay? Because there could be positions beyond that. So if you notice, I am not focusing on IMF. I'm not focusing on whether or not we should go for the deal. I am focusing on our responsibility as citizens to engage with these issues, understand them, use very specific knowledge material to arrive at a position. Granted that we may never completely agree on most of these issues because we have different perspectives and so on, but then it will be very useful to be able to locate different positions. Those that are against the IMF package are not for it because of this and that and that. We need to also identify the different shades, the different positions even within that direction, so that as we move forward, we know how to engage with the issues that have been raised. Because remember, even when the government does go ahead with the IMF package, which I see them going ahead with, they need to recognize the concerns that have been raised. They need to possibly even address the issues that were raised by those that were not keen for the IMF package. So it's not a winner take all. It's not a contest where if those who are for the IMF package win, then everybody else is left out. No. At the end of the day, the issues for those that are not keen on the IMF package need to be understood, well articulated, so that if we do move ahead with the IMF package, then some of the issues that have been raised by those that are against can actually still be addressed, because some of them can still be addressed. Or even those that may not be addressed, but must be very clear. So we must be alive to those issues that have been raised by those that may not be keen, even if we may end up going with a package. I hope you see that point. For me, I'm placing the responsibility on us as citizens to be able to articulate our thoughts clearly, to engage with issues and not be quick to take positions and then defend those positions, even if we sometimes have to raise issues that may not hold water. Another issue, as I come to our responsibility around issues like the IMF package, I would like us to think about the state of our economy right now. Are we factoring that in when we debate the IMF issue? Because if we're going ahead with the IMF package, how is it going to address the current state of the economy? We should be asking those questions, because there's no magic to signing a deal with the IMF. What aspects of our current challenges can be addressed by the IMF package? Remember, it's 1.4 billion over 3 years, and we're currently spending 10 billion per year. So the IMF package doesn't solve everything. So what is it that it will be able to address? Those are the kinds of conversations, and that is why you might even take a position. If you're not keen on the IMF package, then it is because you've looked at it and you feel whatever this money is coming for does not solve our major problems. Therefore, you are not keen on the IMF package. Or because this money will be able to address this major problem or that major problem or the other major problem, therefore, I think we should go for it. Because we must look at value for money. We are going to pay back this money, obviously concessional interest rates, but with interest rates, I haven't looked at the detail on that one. But the point is we have to pay back this money. So there has to be value for this money. So should we then not be saying what exactly is it going to go to, so that we know that by the time we are paying back this money, we know that we've managed to get a return for it. It may not necessarily be an economic return, it may be a social return, but do we think it will be worth it? Okay. If we look at it that way, we can even explain to our relatives in rural areas, because we'll be able to bring it down and say, look, this thing is going to improve this. If it's going to be applied to teachers' salaries, for instance, recruitment of teachers, then we'll be able to say, look, your school, which only has 1 or 2 teachers, I mean, I have a farm in a rural area, and I spend a lot of time there, and I know that there's a school nearby that only has 2 teachers from grade 1 to grade 7, 2 teachers. So if I'm going to explain the IMF deal to them, if the government goes ahead and they say they're going to use it to recruit and retain teachers, then that's one of the things I'll be very specific about. And they will be able to appreciate the benefit of having more teachers and relate it back to the fact that we had to borrow money. That's just one example, okay? So are we looking at the state of the economy and relating it to the IMF deal? Because that may help you know whether you think the IMF deal is going to help us, given the current challenges, or it's not going to help us, because even after borrowing, certain fundamental challenges will still be there. Okay. Another issue that I'm observing in our conversations is around whether or not we're looking at issues in the short term or the long term, or maybe even a bit of both. It's not mutually exclusive. It's not either or. Because some of the arguments seem to be focused on the short term, and so, a thought is advanced from that angle. Others are looking at the long term and ignoring the short term. There's a reality in the short term, because there's something that must still happen today, even if I'll be better off either going for IMF or not going for IMF. Yes, you may project a good long term based on one of the 2 options, but then you can't ignore the fact that there are issues that must be addressed today. So how are you bringing those in? If you are looking at the short term and the impact it will have on the short term, have you considered the fact that there is a long term? So if there's a positive short term, what about the long term? Will that still be positive? If there's a negative short term, what about the long term? Do you think that will be positive, or would you think it will remain negative? I think taking into account both of those aspects will be important. What is our role in this whole process? Number one, I've brought out the fact that we need to engage in the debate, but with material, knowledge material that allow us to reflect clearly what our position is. Okay. It even becomes easier for us to be helped to understand aspects that we may have missed or not taken account of. That's number one in terms of our role. The second role has to do with whichever direction that is taken, holding duty bearers accountable. If we get the detail for why we are going ahead or we will not go ahead, then we'll be able to follow through and say, look, you went ahead with this deal because you said, or you decided not to continue because you said there was this alternative and you said it can work like this. We want to see how it's going to work. There is power in being very clear and very specific about some of these issues, because at the end of the day, we can rally around that and remember at the end of the day, it is the people that elected the government that is in power. And if they see clearly that they're not happy with what is happening, then they have the opportunity to change direction. But the people must be clear so that they can rally around a certain position that is well articulated, so that it can be used as a basis to determine whether a particular government has performed according to expectations or they have not. But there's also another aspect that I want to raise here in terms of responsibility. This is not about government solving our problems. There is no government anywhere that can solve a country's problems. A country's problems are solved by the people themselves and working with the government that they have put in place for those that are democratic. Okay. So it is all of us working with the government, whether we are actually providing checks and balances and holding them accountable. That is one area. Another one is the fact that there will be some kind of adjustment that must happen. I know that's not a popular word because it comes from the structural adjustment programs of yesteryears. But there's definitely some kind of shift that must happen in our own circumstances. Let me pick an easier one. Well, easier because it's not necessarily purely economic. The level of corruption. Corruption has drained our economy in many ways, okay? Because money has been diverted from what it should have been used for. We have had now people have taken advantage of opportunities or positions they have and have, diverted resources. Citizens have abated that corruption. Remember, at the end of the day, a policeman does not bribe another policeman. It is a motorist that bribes a policeman. And it starts from seemingly small things like that weaken institutions. And by the time we have corruption on a big scale, we think that some animals just come in and taken over and we are surprised. It starts from small things that build a culture and informal institutions become established. And based on that, it grows. And before we know it, it is happening at a larger scale than we would have liked. That's a responsibility we have, because if government is going to generate revenues, then we must pay our taxes, we must pay our traffic fines to the right people. If we bribe a policeman with 50 kwacha so that we don't pay 300 kwacha, that 300 kwacha has been lost by the government, because they have their own calculations based on history that on average they can make so much money, from traffic offenses. If we're going to bribe, then that money is lost. Okay, that's just one example. But there are many other examples. For instance, should we continue with subsidies? If you look at the numbers, fuel subsidies are benefiting more of the corporates than they are benefit of the ordinary citizen. I know we all don't like paying more. I mean, I'm returning to Zambia in the next couple of weeks. I've been out for about a little over a year, and I come back there and I still drive a vehicle and I still pay fuel, But it's not just about me not wanting to pay extra for fuel. Should we continue subsidizing that fuel? Does that help us more than me paying more? We need to ask that question. Secondly, do we really have to pay more? Because if paying more is due to inefficiency, should we not interrogate that? Should we not be talking about the process of procurement of fuel or processing fuel? Should we not be looking at the detail of why we have to pay more? Because we possibly don't have to pay more. I would be happy if the subsidy is removed and we still don't have to pay more because we've become efficient, because money is not being lost due to corruption or inefficiencies in the system. But to just allow a subsidy is to put a bandage on a sore that has not been cleaned. Efficiencies are important. Yes, we can discuss whether we start with addressing efficiencies before removing the subsidy, maybe. But at the end of the day, when all has been said and done, we need to improve efficiencies. And I don't think we should have subsidies, because they're not going to the intended beneficiaries. At the end of the day, we are subsidizing large corporations that consume most of the fuel. It's the same case with electricity. Okay, ZESCO is buying electricity from independent providers at a higher fee, and then it's being subsidized. But a lot of the electricity is being used by industry. So who are we subsidizing at the end of the day? And of course, most of us believe that ZESCO is very inefficient. So maybe we should look at efficiencies there, improving efficiencies. But at the end of the day, we may have to also think about either removing subsidies or having smart subsidies. Maybe some profiles of individuals or some regions need subsidies, and maybe others don't. So all those are issues we need to think about. And I'm just giving an example of our responsibility as we move forward, with or without the IMF package. Because even if the IMF package doesn't come in, we still have to revisit the issue of subsidies. And if it comes in and we visit the issue of subsidies, I don't think it would be fair to blame it all on the IMF, because that's an issue we still need to have looked at. Okay. So if you ask me, we have a lot more work to do as citizens, maybe even more than the government, because it's us who must question the government and understand what is being signed up to. It is us who must hold the government accountable when they begin to implement. It is us who must also make necessary adjustments in our economic circumstances, be willing to make those adjustments so that we can pull ourselves out of the current economic situation. There are numbers that tell us that things are not okay. Look at our exchange rate. Of course, I mean, an exchange rate in and of itself, a high exchange rate like this one is not in and of itself a bad thing. I mean, there are countries that have an exchange rate that seems worse than the Zambian kwacha. But that is part of their own economic strategy. Okay, so when we see the exchange rate shifting around, we need to ask ourselves why. It is not something around our deliberate economic strategy. This is an indicator of challenges that we are facing. In any case, an unstable exchange rate is not good for an economy. Okay. At worst, it should be stable at a particular point that allows the economy to adjust and function with what is. Currently, our exchange rate is relatively unstable. Look at the level of inflation. That is also quite high. That is also telling us something about the state of our economy. Look at the interest rates. Those are telling us something about our economy. To arrest all those things will require difficult measures, with or without the IMF. Are we prepared as a country to make the necessary adjustment? I know this may sound a little political, but it shouldn't be. These are realities. There will be adjustments that we have to make for us to pull ourselves out of the current situation. And the challenges to be faced are not going to be borne by government alone. It's going to be borne by the country, including the government, which represents the people. After all, people that work in government are citizens just as much as we are. They spend the kwacha and other currencies, of course, just as much as we do. So if you want to know my opinion on the IMF deal, I will tell you, in different circumstances, I would probably not go for the IMF. Okay, not because I have issues with the IMF, but because in my own work, I'm aware that any lender, especially an institutional lender like the IMF, is well defined in what it thinks should happen, okay? Whether for good or bad reasons. They have their own worldview, okay? And that worldview may not completely sit well with our worldview as Zambia, as a developing country, and given our background, our profile. So I would not want to entrust myself in an institution such as the IMF, even if it was not the IMF, even if it's China, or even a country like China, or any other institution that we may want to borrow from, even private sector. There are differences in worldview. So the IMF for me should never be an easy option. But my view is, given the current circumstances, it is one of the options that must be considered. Okay, number one. But even more important than that is for us to define, as a country, to define what is important, what we want to get out of any economic plan that we want to move forward with. Because it is only then that you can now engage any other player that you may think you need to engage with, internally or externally. At the end of the day, we must find intersectional space and work with that space between what we think is good for us and what the other party thinks is good for us. Is there an overlap? Is there an intersection? And we can only work around that intersection. We must define what our non-negotiables are, so that when we go into such engagements, we know where we can't shift our boundaries. So I think the IMF is not an easy option, but given our current circumstances, it should be considered as an option. Thank you very much for listening. This is Christian Chileshe, and you are on Melo Media Live on Facebook and YouTube. If you have any comments, contributions or questions, please feel free to leave a comment on the WhatsApp and other details that will be provided once I'm done. Thank you very much. God bless Zambia.
Thank you for watching. To sponsor a show or advertise, call or WhatsApp 0763 593 288. Melo Media. Melo Media. Melo Media.